You've been lied to. Told that your silence means nothing. That walking away quietly, without slamming doors or seeking validation, is weakness. That unless you cause a scene, no one really notices you've gone. But what if that belief is not just wrong, but dangerously disempowering? What if your absence, when anchored in peace and purpose, is the loudest message you'll ever send? We live in a world addicted to noise. People perform their healing, curate their confidence, post their smiles like armor. But here's the truth most won't say out loud: just because someone appears unaffected doesn't mean they are. Just because they moved on publicly doesn't mean they've moved on privately. And your stillness? It's doing more damage than your presence ever did. Not because you wish them harm, but because you finally chose self-respect over chaos. Here's the common trap. We think if they haven't reached out, if they haven't apologized or collapsed in grief, that they must be fine. That maybe they never cared. That maybe we were the problem. That's the lie pride whispers into your doubt. But what if I told you their silence is not strength, it's avoidance? What if I told you that your absence is unraveling them in ways they can't even articulate? In this video, we're diving deep. Not just into the performance they put on, but into the consequences they cannot escape. We're going to explore the echoes, the psychological unraveling, the spiritual tension your detachment creates. We're going to talk about the haunting, the shame, the loop they now find themselves trapped in, and why you are no longer responsible for their clarity. This isn't about revenge. It's about reality. It's about reclaiming your power through a Stoic lens, through Stoic relationships that are built on truth, dignity, and detachment. Not because you are cold, but because you've learned that loving someone doesn't mean tolerating cycles that cost you your peace. So if you've ever doubted your impact, if you've ever felt invisible after walking away, or if you've ever been haunted by the thought that maybe they never truly valued you, stay right here. Because what you're about to discover will not only shift how you see your absence, it will reveal why it's the most sacred form of closure you could have ever chosen. And at the end, I'll ask you to declare something. To claim your healing like a warrior, not with rage, but with calm fire. So let's begin. And don't blink, because the most powerful truth might be the one they never said, but are being forced to live with now. 1. The emotional collapse begins quietly. They didn't realize it then, but the quiet you left behind was the loudest consequence of all. Not because you made noise, not because you burned the bridge, but because you didn't. You didn't explode, you didn't justify, you didn't give them the satisfaction of a dramatic ending. You just stopped. And that stillness, that unshakable silence, is what began their slow unraveling. See, we're conditioned to believe that grief, regret, and collapse always come with chaos. But the deepest collapses don't happen in front of an audience. They happen in solitude. And this one, your absence, is happening when they're alone, when the distractions run out, when the smiles fade. They post pictures, they go out, they laugh a little too loud. But underneath the surface, a question has begun to haunt them. Why does it still feel empty? Why doesn't any of this fill the space you left? Because the truth is, they mistook your calm presence for something passive. They assumed your gentleness was forgettable. They thought silence meant indifference. But they were wrong. Stoicism teaches us that strength doesn't shout, it endures. And now your quiet endurance is revealing everything they couldn't see when they had you. It didn't hit them all at once. No, it crept in slowly. A moment of déjà vu when someone else laughs like you. A pause in conversation when no one understands their subtext the way you did. The way a song plays unexpectedly, and suddenly their chest tightens. They don't know why. But you do. You were the rhythm in their chaos. And now that rhythm is gone, their life feels like static. But they won't admit it, not out loud. Because to admit that your absence matters would be to admit that you did. And pride is the armor they still wear, even though it's cracking. It's in the way they stay up later now, scrolling endlessly, searching for something they can't name. It's in the way they wake up tired, not from lack of sleep, but from carrying the weight of their own avoidance. You see, their emotional collapse isn't something the world will ever see. They won't post about it. They won't tell their friends. But it's happening. Silently. Daily. Because your absence didn't just remove a person, it removed a sanctuary. You weren't just there. You held space. You listened without needing to fix. You offered peace without demanding attention. You were consistent in a world that only gave them inconsistency. And now that consistency is gone, they don't know how to regulate. That's the part they never counted on. They thought you were a phase, a temporary calm in their otherwise chaotic life. But now that you've stopped reaching out, now that you've removed your energy, they're starting to notice something terrifying. Their life doesn't feel like life anymore. It feels like noise. Their mind is restless. Their heart is unanchored. And nothing feels right. They're not breaking down in public because they still need the illusion. But behind closed doors, they're collapsing in ways they never expected. It's subtle at first. They avoid certain places, certain songs. They stop wearing a sweater you complimented. They change their coffee order because it reminds them of you. And then it grows. They stop feeling excited about things. They lose interest in people they once chased. They find themselves missing something, but they can't explain what. They try to name it. Maybe it was chemistry. Maybe it was timing. But nothing quite fits. Because what they're missing isn't just a connection. They're missing the version of themselves that felt grounded when they were around you. And now that you're gone, they can't find that version anymore. They don't know how to be calm in the chaos without you. And so the collapse deepens. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to remind them. Life is doing the reminding for you. Every time they try to force a new connection, they feel the hollowness. Every time they sit in a room full of people and still feel alone, they remember what it was like to sit with you and feel understood. That's what they lost. And it's not coming back. Not because you're punishing them, but because you finally saw the pattern. You saw that you were giving endlessly to someone who couldn't hold the space you created. And in true stoicism, you didn't retaliate, you simply released. You chose peace over performance. And now, that peace is the very thing haunting them. Every morning they wake up and realize you haven't texted. Every moment they check their phone and your name isn't there. It's not the big gestures that shake them, it's the absence of the small ones. The things they used to take for granted. And now, those small absences have become unbearable. They feel it in their body. Their energy is scattered. Their mind is cluttered. And no matter what they do, they can't recreate what they once had. Because what they had wasn't a moment, it was medicine. And now the dose is gone, and the withdrawal is brutal. This is the part of Stoic relationships no one talks about. That sometimes the most powerful action is no action at all. That sometimes, walking away silently is what speaks the loudest. You didn't need to prove your worth. Your absence is doing that. You didn't need to justify your leaving. Their unraveling is the explanation. And as they spiral, as they smile for photos and pretend everything's fine, they're learning a truth that hits harder than any confrontation ever could. You were never the one falling apart. You were the one holding it together. And now that you're gone, there's nothing left holding them up. They won't tell anyone. They might not even admit it to themselves. But deep down, where their pride can't protect them, they know. They know what they lost. And the collapse, though quiet, is catastrophic. Because they didn't just lose you, they lost access to peace, to presence, to emotional structure. They lost the one person who didn't try to fix them, but simply stood beside them while they healed. And that kind of presence can't be replicated. Not by partying. Not by dating. Not by pretending. It's a rare kind of energy that stays with someone long after it's gone. And that's what you've become now, not a memory, not a moment, but a frequency they can't tune out. So if you've ever wondered if your absence matters, if you've ever questioned your decision to stay silent, this is your answer. It's working. Not because you're seeking revenge, but because you're rooted in clarity. You've stopped fighting for someone who never learned how to receive your love. And now, they're left with the echo of everything you gave. An echo that's louder in the silence than any word you ever spoke. That's the collapse. Not sudden, not visible, but slow, deep, and irreversible. They can't escape it, not because you're chasing, but because you stopped. And that's what changed everything. This is what Stoicism teaches us in love. Don't try to force understanding. Don't demand validation. Stand still. And let the silence reveal what the noise always tried to hide. Your absence is destroying them. And they're just now starting to realize they did it to themselves. 2. You were the peace in their chaos. You were the peace in their chaos, and now without you, the noise has become unbearable. Not just noise in the external world, the parties, the posts, the constant motion, but internal noise. Static. Restlessness. The kind that doesn't go away no matter how many people they surround themselves with. Because here's what they never realized while you were there. It wasn't their life that was calm. It was you. You were the regulating presence, the unseen balance, the emotional equilibrium holding everything together in ways they couldn't understand until the foundation crumbled. That's what happens when someone gets used to serenity without ever asking where it came from. They start assuming it's permanent, automatic. But when you left, the balance tipped, and now their soul feels the tremor. And they don't have the language for it. Because what you gave wasn't just comfort. It was spiritual structure. You provided a rhythm to their mess. You anticipated needs they couldn't express. You made their hard days feel manageable and their anxious thoughts feel safe. And now that safety is gone. They still don't know how deeply they depended on your frequency until the quiet set in. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that makes your own mind too loud to bear. Because now they're face to face with themselves, and they realize you weren't just a person, you were a sanctuary. You weren't just love, you were relief. You were clarity. And losing that isn't like losing a conversation or a date, it's like losing gravity. The Stoics teach us not to depend on external things for internal peace. But the irony is that while they claimed independence, they were leaning on your presence more than they ever admitted. You didn't give them escape, you gave them reflection. And now that reflection is gone, and what they see in the mirror without you is unsettling. The people they meet now don't hold space the way you did. The conversations feel shallow, the moments feel forced. They're surrounded by people, but none of them feel like home. Because they didn't lose just any person, they lost the one person who knew how to listen between their words, to hear the wound behind the smile, to offer safety without making them feel small. And that kind of loss doesn't heal quickly. In fact, it doesn't feel like loss at first. It feels like freedom. Until the silence grows too heavy. Until they try to recreate your atmosphere with someone new and realize it's not working. It's never going to work. Because you were never just there, you were holding space. And holding space isn't something you can fake. It's something that's felt at a nervous system level. You didn't just talk them down when they spiraled, you calibrated them. You brought their scattered energy back into focus. You made their chaos coherent. That's what they miss now. Not just the comfort, but the clarity. Because the world outside is loud and confusing, and you were the rare soul that didn't add to the noise. You were the pause, the breath, the place they didn't have to perform. And now, every new connection feels like another performance. Another test. Another stage. They're exhausted. And they don't even know why. But you do. Because you know what it costs to carry someone's unspoken burdens. You know what it feels like to love someone through their confusion. And now, you know what it feels like to leave them with their own weight, and watch them realize they were never strong enough to hold it alone. That's the power of Stoic relationships. You don't scream. You don't chase. You simply let the truth rise in the silence. And the truth is this: you were the calm they mistook for coincidence. You were the order in their disorder. And now they are forced to face the storm they once blamed on everything else but themselves. It's starting to dawn on them. Slowly. In those quiet moments when they try to relax and realize they can't. In the middle of conversations where they find themselves tuning out, because the connection isn't deep enough. In the way their body tenses when they think about reaching out, but their pride holds them back. It's eating at them. That feeling, that knowing, that haunting sense that they fumbled something sacred. They won't tell anyone, but it's there. In the way they've started looking tired. In the way their laugh doesn't quite reach their eyes anymore. In the way their posts feel like they're trying too hard. And they don't even know what they're chasing. Because it's not about finding someone new. It's about trying to recreate the feeling they once had with you. And that feeling wasn't chemistry. It wasn't infatuation. It was peace. It was that rare sensation that they didn't have to fight to be understood. That they could be chaotic and still be held. That someone could see them in their mess and not flinch. That someone could love them without needing to fix them. And now, that energy is gone. And their nervous system knows it before their mind can admit it. That's why they can't sleep. That's why they're restless. That's why they can't stay interested in anyone for too long. Because what they're really searching for is the feeling of being grounded. And grounding isn't something you can fake. It's not something you can buy. It's not something you can scroll for. It's something you feel. And they haven't felt it since you left. You were the breath in their lungs and now they're suffocating slowly. Not enough to panic. Just enough to make everything feel off. Dull. Heavy. They thought they were doing fine until the tension built up. Until the wrong song came on. Until a scent passed by. Until they walked into a room that used to feel like peace and now feels like pressure. Because that's the cost of losing real presence. It doesn't hit all at once. It unravels you in pieces. And they are unraveling. You are not their enemy. But your absence is their mirror. And what it reflects is hard to look at. You gave them calm without asking for credit. You stayed solid when they drifted. You poured without demanding. And now you've stopped. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. And that's what stings. Because it means they can't hate you. They can't even blame you. And so the blame turns inward. Slowly. Painfully. Quietly. That's what Stoicism has given you. The ability to stand still while they spin. The grace to remain calm while their world falls apart. And the wisdom to know that you no longer need to be their savior. You were the peace in their chaos. And now that peace has returned to you. And they're left with their own storm. If you've felt this deeply, if this has reflected something you always sensed but couldn't put into words, then honor this moment. Like this video. Comment, number 1, if this truth landed in your soul. And don't forget to subscribe. Because this isn't the end. This is the reintroduction to your power, and we're just getting started. 3. Trapped in the loop of regret. They aren't chasing something new, they're subconsciously chasing you, stuck in a loop they don't understand. It's not about falling in love again. It's about finding that specific feeling only you ever gave them, a feeling they didn't even know how to appreciate when they had it. Now they're lost in a cycle. Meeting people, making connections, convincing themselves they're ready, only to feel the emptiness creeping in again. It's not the faces that feel off, it's the absence of soul. Every conversation sounds right on paper but lacks resonance. Every laugh feels timed, not natural. Every romantic gesture is mechanical, like they're playing a role they don't quite remember how to embody. And what makes it harder is they don't even realize they're repeating the same play. They think they're healing. They think they've grown. But Carl Jung called it repetition compulsion, a psychological loop where the soul tries to repair what the ego destroyed. That's where they are. Repeating the shape of you in shadows and reflections. Finding someone who smiles like you, talks like you, even carries a similar energy, but it never fits. Because your presence wasn't aesthetic. It was energetic. You were noise. You were frequency. And they can't duplicate that no matter how hard they try. What's worse is that each failed attempt deepens their internal confusion. Why doesn't this feel right? Why do they lose interest so fast? Why does everything feel temporary now? The answer is simple. They didn't lose just a relationship. They lost an experience of truth. And when you lose truth, you lose grounding. You lose self. They may not admit it, but this loop is not new. It started the moment they chose their ego over evolution. The moment they let their pride block your grace. The moment they saw your love and said, "Not now." And now they're haunted by the realization that there won't be another chance. That you're not waiting. That you're not checking in. That you've stopped orbiting them emotionally. And so they spin in place, hoping that if they keep moving, keep dating, keep pretending, they'll eventually forget. But forgetting doesn't come from distraction. It comes from integration. And integration requires honesty. They're not ready for that. Because honesty would mean admitting that they threw away something sacred. That they had access to a rare kind of peace and chose noise. That they mistook your stillness for weakness and now suffer from the disorientation of your absence. Every new person is a test they don't pass. Not because those people aren't good, but because those people aren't you. You are their mirror, their comfort, their challenge, their reminder that growth is possible. And now that mirror is shattered and they don't like what they see without it. So they date. They scroll. They entertain. But it's always short-lived. Always incomplete. Because you can't replace transformation with entertainment. You can't substitute soul with stimulation. And they're learning that the hard way. The loop is exhausting. They know it. Deep down, they feel it. But they keep going, because sitting still would mean facing the pain. And pain is the one thing they've spent their whole life avoiding. You, however, did the opposite. You sat with your grief. You faced the silence. You embraced the discomfort. And that's why you're no longer trapped. That's why you've evolved. Because Stoicism isn't about suppressing emotions, it's about mastering your relationship with them. And in mastering your emotions, you master the storm they once used to pull you back in. Now they have to live with the consequences. And the consequence is this: everything feels like an echo of what they lost. They look happy. But the joy is short-lived. They laugh. But it doesn't settle. They achieve. But it feels empty. Because nothing hits the way your presence did. Nothing anchors them the way your energy did. They thought it would be easy. That you'd be another person they got over. But time hasn't softened the loss, it's sharpened it. Every month without you has clarified what they truly had. And that clarity, it cuts. They didn't just lose access to you, they lost access to the version of themselves that only existed with you. That version who felt safe, seen, capable of being deeply loved. That's the real regret, not that you're gone, but that you brought out someone in them they now miss more than they miss you. That's what Stoic Relationships reveal. They teach through absence, through silence, through detachment. And now that you've detached, you've become untouchable, not because you're cruel, but because you're clear. And they're still cloudy, still spinning, still hoping to find a shortcut to the healing you earned. But shortcuts don't work here. Not with soul wounds. Not with emotional echoes. Not with lessons they refused to learn when you were willing to teach gently. Now the universe teaches through emptiness. Through patterns that don't complete. Through songs that don't land. Through people that almost feel right, but never do. And the loop tightens. They start questioning their worth. They wonder if they're broken. But they're not broken, they're unfinished. Unprocessed. Unaware that the very cycle they're trapped in was built by their avoidance. Built by every moment they deflected your love. By every time they withheld clarity. By every silence they thought you'd fill. And now those silences have become voids. And those voids echo with your name. You don't need to reach out. Don't need to remind them. They're living inside the memory. Not because they chose to, but because they didn't choose to evolve. And now your absence has become the curriculum they can't drop. It's in their sleep. In their dreams. In the moments of stillness between distractions. And they can't explain why it won't go away. But we know why. Because real energy leaves marks that can't be scrubbed out with distractions. Real connection leaves fingerprints on the soul. And now your fingerprint is haunting their nervous system. Not because you cursed them, but because they refused to bless you with recognition while they had the chance. You were the breakthrough they didn't see coming. And now that you're gone, they're stuck trying to repeat the pattern with people who can't meet the blueprint. You are the blueprint. And they threw it away. So now they improvise. But improvisation only works when you've mastered the material. And they haven't. Because they never studied you. Never listened when it mattered. Never showed up when you called softly. And so the pattern repeats. And repeats. And repeats. Until one day, maybe, they'll sit still long enough to admit it. That you weren't just a chapter. You were the turning point. The pivot. The proof that love can be safe and deep and transformative. But by the time they do, you'll be too far along your journey. Not out of reach, but out of resonance. Because you've changed. You've grown. You've stopped looping. And now they're left behind. In the loop. In the longing. In the regret. Not because you wanted them to suffer, but because you finally stopped suffering for their sake. And that shift? That's the real freedom. That's stoicism. That's power. 4. The mirror effect, facing their own shadows. Every mirror now reflects their old actions, and they finally see the pain they once ignored. At first, it was subtle, a flash of your voice in the silence, a glance from someone that reminded them of the way you used to look at them when they didn't deserve it. Then it grew stronger. Now, every time they get ghosted, every time someone shuts them out, every moment they feel unseen or dismissed or neglected, it hits with new force. This is what they did. This is how it felt. They finally feel what they made you carry alone, and the realization burns. It's not just memory, it's feedback. Life is mirroring them now with perfect clarity. And they don't get to mute the playback. That moment they walked away from you without explanation? It replays in the form of someone else walking away from them. That hour you waited for a reply that never came? They're staring at a screen now, wondering why the response is delayed, or worse, doesn't come at all. And the irony? They don't even connect it yet. But their soul does. Their subconscious is pulling the threads tighter every day. Carl Jung said everything that irritates us about others can lead to a deeper understanding of ourselves. And now, those irritations are daily. Constant. Relentless. Because the universe doesn't skip lessons. It waits. It brings back energy until it's acknowledged, and this time it's demanding they see the truth. Not through you, but through others. Because the same behaviors they used as shields, silence, blame, avoidance, are now being weaponized against them. And they feel powerless. Not because they don't want to fix it, but because they don't know how. You were the only one who ever taught them emotional safety, and now that teacher is gone. You were their shot at learning to reflect, to evolve, to rise. But they ignored the invitation, and now they're failing the test. They look around and wonder why no one holds space like you did. Why no one listens without judgment. Why no one sees past the mask. But the answer is clear. They used your love as armor when they were scared of being seen. And now that you're gone, they're forced to look at themselves, unfiltered, unprotected, unprepared. The same walls they built to keep you out are now the ones trapping them in. That's the mirror. That's the justice. It's not about punishment. It's about symmetry. Stoicism teaches us that actions echo. That character is revealed not when things are easy, but when the consequences come. And now, the consequence is reflection. And it's brutal. Not because you said anything, but because you said nothing. Your absence left a void, and that void became a screen where their past behavior plays on loop. Every moment they minimize you, every eye roll, every ghosted message, every withheld compliment, they see it now. Not through your words, but through experience. You don't need to say a thing. Life is speaking on your behalf. That moment they laughed when you cried? Now they're crying alone, and no one is answering the phone. That moment they dismissed your needs as too much? Now they're begging someone to meet them halfway and being met with silence. That moment they chose comfort over truth? Now truth is confronting them in the most uncomfortable ways. That's the mirror. That's the reckoning. And no one is coming to save them from it. You were their shot at evolution, and they didn't take it. So now growth comes the hard way, through contrast, through loss, through repetition. They can't escape it. Because every new connection shows them what they had. Every missed call reminds them of the calls you used to make. Every friend that doesn't understand them reminds them of the one who did. It's relentless. And it's righteous. Because this is what healing really looks like, not flowers and apologies, but confrontation. Not on the outside, but within. They see themselves now. And they flinch. Not because you're there to judge, but because you're gone and they have to judge themselves. That's what makes it permanent. That's what makes it stick. You're not their mirror anymore. Life is. And life doesn't lie. Life brings back the exact frequency you send out, and what they once dismissed as drama, they now understand as grace. You didn't leave them in anger. You left them in truth. And that truth has returned in forms they can't reject. This is what makes Stoic relationships sacred. Because when you move with integrity, you don't need closure, you become it. You don't chase understanding, you embody it. You don't demand change, you reflect the need for it. And now, your stillness is reflecting their storm. Your detachment is revealing their attachment to dysfunction. Your absence is turning up the volume on their conscience. And the guilt is louder than ever. But pride still stands in the way. They won't reach out. They won't say, "I see it now." But they do. They're just not strong enough yet to admit it. So they perform. Smile. Post. Pretend. But you know better. You know that behind every curated photo is a flash of regret. That behind every flirty comment is a comparison. That behind every confident laugh is a question. Will anyone ever see me like they did? The answer is no. Not because they're unworthy, but because they weren't ready. And now, the gap between who they are and who they could have become with you is impossible to ignore. They see the version of themselves you once reflected, and it haunts them. Not because it was fake, but because it was real. And it's gone. That's the cost of avoidance. That's the price of pride. They had someone who saw their light and still stayed when the shadows showed up. And now they're alone with the shadows, and the light is nowhere to be found. That's the lesson. That's the mirror. That's why they can't move on, not truly. Because moving on requires healing, and healing requires accountability. And they're not ready. But you are. You've moved beyond the mirror. Beyond the need to be seen. Because you see yourself now. Clearly. Fully. Peacefully. That's the gift of Stoicism. That's what reflection, when owned, becomes wisdom. And now you carry it while they carry the echo. If this moment opened your eyes, if you feel the clarity in your chest, like a weight finally lifted, honor it. Like this video. Comment, number 1, if you're claiming your power. And don't forget to subscribe, because we're only getting stronger. We're just beginning to step into the silence that transforms everything. 5. The Unfinished Symphony. They expected a final scene, a goodbye loud enough to quiet their guilt, but you gave them silence. Not because you didn't care, but because you had finally outgrown the performance. You didn't scream, you didn't block, you didn't leave a long paragraph explaining why. Because you understood something they never did. Closure is not a conversation, it's a decision. And you made it. Calmly. Clearly. Stoically. And now they are left in the ruins of the ending they thought they could control. They counted on drama. On conflict. On something messy enough that they could rewrite the narrative and tell themselves you were too emotional, too reactive, too much. But you weren't. You were composed. You exited like a soul that knew its value. And that's what they never prepared for. That kind of calm lingers. It doesn't just end, it echoes. Because you didn't leave them with an explosion to point at. You left them with a silence so vast, it forces them to listen to themselves. And the sound of their own conscience is unbearable. They scroll back through old messages, looking for something, anything, that might hint at why you stopped. But you were always honest. Always clear. They just didn't believe you'd really walk away. They thought the cycle would continue, that your compassion would keep you caught. But it didn't. Because your compassion evolved into clarity. Your attachment transformed into boundaries. Your love finally included yourself. And now, that self-respect is the ghost they can't silence. It shows up in every moment of stillness, every hour when the distractions fade, every conversation that reminds them of how safe it once felt to speak with you. Because what they miss isn't just your voice, it's the peace it carried. It's the calm between the words. It's the atmosphere that made their world feel tolerable. And now it's gone. Not shattered, not destroyed, just absent. Removed. Quiet. And that quiet is louder than anything they've heard since. Because they can't rewrite this story. You gave them nothing to work with. No drama. No fault. Just distance. And in that distance, their imagination has become their punishment. They wonder if you still think of them. If you hurt. If you miss them. And the not knowing drives them deeper into their own chaos. Because they expected a finale. But you gave them an unfinished symphony. A melody with no resolve. A chord that never closed. And it plays in their mind every time they try to move on. They listen for your name in songs. They scan for clues in your silence. They replay old memories, hoping to find the moment they lost you. But the truth is, they never had you fully, not because you withheld, but because they never chose to receive you completely. They were too busy waiting for a dramatic ending, and now they're stuck in a beginning they'll never get back to. That's the power of stillness. That's what Stoicism teaches us, not to fight the ending, but to trust the lesson. You didn't need them to understand. You needed you to understand. And now that you do, there's no going back. No version of you will ever re-enter that loop. Because you saw what they couldn't, that love without reflection is not love. That silence without accountability is not peace. And now, they're realizing that every time they open their phone and see your name missing. Every time they say something and wish they could share it with you. Every time a stranger says something in your tone, and their stomach turns. You became the song they hum when they think no one is listening. The harmony in their solitude. The melody of regret. And there's no chorus coming. No redemption arc. Because you gave them all the chances to rise, and they stayed seated. Now they're stuck with the consequence, not just of losing you, but of never getting to explain it. That's what haunts them. Not the absence, but the ambiguity. Because they don't get to be the hero in this version. They don't get the narrative. You do. And you've chosen to write it without them. That's why it hurts more. Because they can't pin it on drama. They can't say you went crazy. They can't claim you were unstable. All they can say is you left. Calmly. Intentionally. Irrevocably. And now the door doesn't just feel closed, it feels disappeared. And they keep reaching for a doorknob that no longer exists. That's the unfinished symphony. Not broken, but unsung. Not tragic, but unrepeatable. And the longer they sit with that, the more they realize, this wasn't about an ending. It was about a becoming. Yours. You became the person who doesn't need closure from the person who couldn't give it. You became the person who offers peace to themselves. You became the version of you they always feared, and always admired. The one who doesn't beg. Who doesn't chase. Who doesn't need to be understood by someone who only understood performance. Now they watch from afar. Maybe they'll never say a word. Maybe they'll never apologize. But the silence they're in is not comfortable. It's filled with everything they never said, never gave, never held. And your absence is the reminder. Not because you tried to hurt them, but because you refused to hurt yourself anymore. That's what Stoic love looks like. It ends with grace, and echoes with power. And they're hearing it loud and clear. 6. Their environment is turning against them. They thought you were just a moment, but your energy became the architecture of their daily life. And now that you're gone, that structure is collapsing around them in the most ordinary and unrelenting ways. It's in the songs that randomly shuffle through their playlist, the ones you used to hum when the world felt quiet. It's in the coffee shop where you used to sit that now feels hollow, lifeless, like something essential went missing from the air. It's in the corner of the room where your laughter once lingered, and now only shadows stretch in silence. They don't realize it at first. They think it's just nostalgia. But nostalgia fades. This doesn't. This lingers. This repeats. This invades their senses, catches them off guard. They grab a jacket and catch a scent that shouldn't be there anymore. A friend says a phrase that once made you both laugh. A memory rises when they weren't looking for it. And suddenly they're pulled under, not by force, but by the sheer presence of your absence. That's the paradox. They're not haunted by you. They're haunted by what they did when they had you. Because you weren't just someone passing through. You became embedded. Not in drama or intensity, but in the subtle, sacred rituals of their life. Your energy wasn't decoration. It was design. You helped shape their world in ways they couldn't see until the walls began to crack without you. Now, everything feels colder. Time feels slower. Food tastes different. And not because you made their life dramatic, but because you made it full. Stoicism teaches us to release attachment, but what they're feeling now isn't about attachment to a person, it's withdrawal from a presence. A frequency that no one else has been able to replicate. They try to erase it. Rearranging furniture. Changing habits. Avoiding the parts of the city that remind them of you. But energy doesn't leave when you cover it up. It rises through the cracks. It fills the empty space. They might change their routines, but something deeper always leads them back to the feeling. That haunting sense that the most grounded part of their world disappeared. You weren't just support. You were the calibration. The one who gave their chaos meaning. The one who made the silence soft instead of sharp. And now, that calibration is gone. So they keep reaching for replacements. New people. New hobbies. New distractions. But no matter how many things they throw into the void remains. Not because you hexed them. Not because you're watching. But because your energy was real. Not loud, not flashy, real. And real doesn't fade. It integrates. It bonds. It leaves echoes. And those echoes are what they live with now. It's not punishment. It's resonance. Their environment has turned against them because it's honest. It's revealing what they refused to feel when they still had time to fix it. Now, their room reminds them of you. Their clothes. Their kitchen. Even the movies you never finished watching together seem to call their name at night. They avoid eye contact with their own reflection, because there's a part of them that knows. They didn't just lose a partner. They lost presence. They lost safety. They lost the energy that made the most mundane moments feel sacred. And they did it quietly, carelessly, convinced they'd be fine. But they're not. They're unraveling. Stoic relationships don't require reminders. They become reminders. They don't collapse with confrontation. They dissolve with clarity. And now the clarity is everywhere. In their car, their bed, their music, their breath. You're not there, but everything still feels like you. That's the pain they can't name out loud. That's the sensation they hide behind jokes and updates and photos with people who don't really know them. You did. You knew them in the gaps, in the in-between moments, in the unspoken tension they thought no one could read. And now they're surrounded by people who only see the surface. And they miss the depth. They crave it. They wonder why everything feels so one-dimensional now. Why conversations feel shallow. Why they leave parties feeling more alone than when they arrived. And it's because your energy became their compass, and without it, they're drifting. They thought they were just changing chapters. But this wasn't a chapter. This was the whole book. The story that brought coherence to everything else. Now they're in a sequel that doesn't make sense. And the plot holes are gaping. They wonder if maybe, just maybe, they'll run into you again. Not because they deserve it, but because they don't know what else to do. They replay the past, not because they miss the moments, but because the present feels too unbearable to face alone. And you? You're not in the loop. You're not stuck in the cycle. You've risen above the echo. You've stepped into your own alignment. Because you understood what they couldn't, that true connection isn't about being seen. It's about being felt. And now that they've lost that, nothing else satisfies. Not the late-night texts. Not the surface intimacy. Not the constant scrolling. They're overstimulated and undernourished. Spiritually starving. And the only meal they ever truly digested was your presence. That's what Stoicism does. It teaches you to become whole on your own. So that when someone fails to value your presence, you don't lose yourself trying to convince them. You simply exit. And the exit speaks for itself. Your absence isn't passive. It's active. It's shaking their world every single day, not because you intended it, but because they did. They created this. They built this ache by ignoring the miracle you were offering. And now, even their own home feels haunted. Not by you, but by the version of themselves they could have become, if they had just seen clearly. That's the final irony. They thought your love was a comfort. But it was a catalyst. And now, that catalyst is gone. So if this resonated, if you feel this truth in your bones, then do something to ground it. Like this video. Comment number 1, if your presence once turned someone's world into peace. And subscribe, because the next chapter in your healing is about to begin. And you don't want to miss it. Your absence didn't destroy them because you stopped loving. It destroyed them because you started loving yourself. And in that shift, everything changed. You no longer bent for the sake of their comfort. You no longer offered explanations to a soul that wasn't listening. You stopped performing. You stopped overfunctioning. You chose stillness, presence, healing. You chose to become the home you once tried to build inside someone else. And that is what unmade them. Not vengeance. Not rejection. But the decision to live fully without needing their permission. That decision now stands like a monument in their memory. Because they didn't expect you to thrive. They expected you to fade. To chase. To linger in grief long enough for them to decide when they were ready to reach out. But you didn't wait. You walked. And that movement, quiet and unannounced, is what echoes in their world now. It wasn't the silence that broke them. It was the fact that the silence became sacred to you. That you stopped aching and started accepting. That you stopped asking questions and started embodying answers. They don't know how to process that. Because their entire narrative was built around the belief that you needed them more than they needed you. But now, they're seeing it was the opposite all along. You were the anchor. The atmosphere. The peace. And now that you've withdrawn, their internal storm has no shelter. And that's not your fault. That's the cost of spiritual misalignment. The cost of ignoring sacred energy. The cost of choosing comfort over growth. You were never asking for perfection. Only presence. Only honesty. Only a willingness to meet you halfway. But they mistook your steadiness for dependency. Your loyalty for weakness. Your patience for passivity. And now they're learning that love is not loud, but it is final. And when a stoic heart says enough, there is no door left to knock on. No script left to rewrite. No scene left to perform. You didn't just leave. You evolved. You expanded. You became a version of yourself that doesn't explain why peace feels better than chaos. You don't need to. Your life is the explanation. Your eyes. Your posture. Your calm. Your glow. It all says what words never could, that their loss was not your downfall, it was your catalyst. And they know it. Even if they'll never say it. They know it in their restlessness. In their overthinking. In the way no one quite feels like home anymore. They know it in the weight of unsaid words and unmet moments. They know it in the stillness you now carry effortlessly. In the boundaries you enforce without bitterness. In the way your energy no longer bends to be understood. And as they watch your story unfold from a distance, they realize that the chapter they gave up on became your greatest turning point. That they walked away at the very moment you were about to rise. And now you're rising. Without them. Without apology. Without delay. Because Stoicism isn't about shutting down, it's about standing up. For yourself. For your values. For your worth. You've done that. And the reverberation is undeniable. You became the echo. The reminder. The proof that love can exist with dignity. That endings don't require explosions to be powerful. That you can leave quietly and still change someone's life forever. Your silence taught them what your presence never could. That peace is not weakness, it's a force. A force that rearranges the soul. A force that reveals truth. A force that builds a life too grounded to be shaken by temporary people. And that's what you've built. A life. A wholeness. A reality that no longer includes them, not out of hate, but out of evolution. Because they were the lesson, not the destination. They were the pattern, not the partner. And now, they live in the aftershock of a love they didn't respect in time. While you move forward. Still. Steady. Sovereign. Not because it doesn't hurt, but because it no longer controls you. Not because you've forgotten, but because you've integrated. And that integration is your freedom. Your proof. Your power. That you are no longer the person who needed closure from someone who refused to give it. You are the closure. You are the healed ending. You are the final word. And they will feel it in every space your name is no longer spoken. In every version of themselves they meet that doesn't measure up to who they could have been with you. In every soft goodbye they experience that never feels like resolution. You became the story they can't retell without facing themselves. And that's the legacy of your detachment. Not absence, but awakening. Not resentment, but redirection. Not regret, but rebirth. You didn't lose them. You released them. You released the cycle, the confusion, the contraction. You released the version of yourself that overgave, that waited, that hoped. And in that release, you reclaimed everything you once thought had to come from them. You are not their wound. You are their lesson. The mirror they broke. The light they couldn't hold. And now, in the quiet corners of their life, in the tension behind their smiles, in the hunger behind their scrolling, your name lives not as a hope, but as a truth. A truth they'll carry whether they admit it or not. A truth that shaped them, even after you stopped speaking. That's the real impact. That's the real ending. When your love becomes the echo that outlasts the noise. When your silence says everything. When your absence writes the story they were never brave enough to co-author. And in that story, you are not the one who broke. You are the one who became.